Hello, hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, Season 2!
Booyah!
I am your one of your hosts, Andy.
I am your host, Bruce!
And we are back! Bruce, what have you been up to? How's your break been?
Oh, let me tell you, I have done so much over these last couple of weeks. I went out and, oh wait, no, I didn't do that. That wasn't this week. That was a year ago this week when I went out. Facebook was kind enough to notify me of something that I had done a year ago that involved playing Magic at friends' houses. A year ago? Yes.
Oh.
Now I play Magic the Video. So.
Speaking of Magic the Video, me, since you so kindly asked, I went off with my pirate deck. I made a pirate deck a while ago, with a bunch of Ixalan pirates. But Commander Legends has got some talented pirates.
I be left to walk the plank in that game.
I feel like it really did a number on my opponents.
I have never seen that deck come out quite like that.
The secret is to get Malcolm out on turn 2 so that you can just start generating treasures for a very low cost.
That did seem to be helpful.
But also stealing other people's stuff, even the people who really couldn't afford to have stuff stealing, which I felt very bad about, but I didn't really have much of a choice.
Hey, yo ho ho, a pirate's life for you.
Playing against a Edgar Markov deck was a little worrisome. So
you play against Edgar Markov, you best come for the kill.
Yeah, that's been my break. Now we're back with season 2. We've got 10 episodes lined up for you. They're gonna be pretty good, if I do say so myself. Got some repeating segments. Forgot the word. Episode length segments. Some repeating themes, I guess.
We took what we thought were our best ideas.
Yes.
And said, you know what? Let's shamelessly do this again. So we did. Or
let's not think of new ideas, because that's really hard to do. And just, yeah. So welcome back. It's been a long 2 weeks, and we're here now. Today's episode, we're going to talk about something controversial.
Dun dun dun!
I had the bright idea to tell all of you that white is a good color in Magic, because I love the color, and I think it so encapsulates my thesis around how I want to play a game of Magic, especially EDH. So we're going to dissect it in general and pull out some specifics and really, really look at it as a mechanically sound color. How's that sound? Any disagreements yet?
Well, let's take a look,
Okay.
We'll see how this plays out. Just as my thought going into this was, I've always felt white is stronger than people give it credit for. I am not convinced that by any stretch of the imagination that white is the best color in Magic. I think that white has some issues, but I am prepared to be amazed and astounded by what we find as we go through the episode.
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly and unironically love playing white cards, and not as like a meme. Like I get it, I get the joke, but there are some real cool cards. So let's dive right in. First up, let's talk about what white does best: ramp. So obviously, white isn't great at ramp. It's got some good ramp cards, but honestly, other than green, you're gonna especially in an EDH game, you're gonna generally go for that colorless ramp. But, white's got land tax. It's got Knight of the White Orchid. Is that what it was?
Yes. The land tax option was really white's ramp for the longest time. And basically what that meant was white waits until somebody else starts to ramp, and then white can start to ramp too.
Right. And not only that, it's like thinning its deck out exponentially.
Well, it's been sort of decided that removing one or two cards from your deck doesn't really change the percentages of drawing other spells. The thing with something like land tax is if you play it properly, you can genuinely get better draws. Just, you don't always have to play the land.
Right.
I watch so many people run land tax or cards similar to it, whether it's Knight of the White Orchid or
Keeper of the Accord.
Yeah, and the Weathered Wayfarer, where they play these cards, start the turn, and like, okay, I have less land. They draw their land, and then play the land so they now no longer have less land. Okay, why are you doing that? Don't do that. Allow yourself to be one behind. One, it means you're less of a target because you're clearly not the strongest. Two, you get to draw when you're behind. You're searching out lands. You are thinning your deck, because if you're pulling that many cards out of your deck turn after turn, you are gaining ground by knowing that the percentages of drawing good cards are going to be much higher. So don't immediately play that land. Obviously in the first few turns, you can play the land because you know that other people are going to continue to play land as well. So you're less worried about it. But you can't put yourself in a position where you play that land and then you don't get to do this again the next turn. With a card like Land Tax, I would rather draw the lands, not play them, and then have to discard them, knowing that I'm going to get to search out more lands the next turn.
Yeah.
That just to me makes sense. I mean, obviously, caveat, there's always the exceptions, but that's there. And that's always been White's primary go-to as far as ramp, which is part of the reason why White does ramp the way Andy was describing it, through artifacts, whether it's your mana rocks or other artifacts that allow you to draw extra land. That's what White always went to. And now,
it's also the reason why cards like Land Tax, even reprint after reprint, are still $20. Like, it's kind of a one thing that they have. But people will still look at that and be like, it's only helping you if you're behind. Which, yes, but is that so bad?
Right, and a statement like that is just saying, we think you're behind if you're behind on land. Now, if I'm at 3 land and you're at 5, then yeah, I'm behind. But what happens late in the game? If I'm at 11 land and you're at 12, am I behind? I mean, at that point, that 1 mana could make a difference. But practically speaking, the idea that I'm going to begin my upkeep searching for up to 3 basics, putting them in my hand, means I'm taking 3 cards out of that library. And at this point in time, I may have done that 3 times now.
Yeah.
Well, now I've removed 9 of the 40 lands in my deck. The percentage of lands in my deck is now significantly lower than it was. I'm going to draw good stuff at a significantly higher rate than my opponent. And if this means that I'm going to be 1 land behind when he's at 11 and I'm at 10, and then when he's at 12, I'm at 11, I can live with that. I can think of another card that would go really good in decks that run land tax. I don't know. Maybe there's a temple. I think it has, what is it? Temple of the False God? I don't remember exactly the wording on the card, but I think that one would be pretty good with land tax.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, I'm not sure,
it's been
but
a number of weeks since I've thought about it.
But this just did. So, you can't just say, oh, it's only good when you're behind, because that's only looking at it from a mana perspective, period. You're not looking at anything else.
Yeah.
So you just have to remember, White's ramp might not be as good, but White's ramp also comes with another bonus. So White has also, in the last few years, gone beyond just doing land tax and variants of land tax.
Right.
And it's, the obvious card that everybody knows, that everybody was waiting for us to talk about as soon as we mentioned ramp, was Smothering Tithe. Simply put, Smothering Tithe by itself, I think, is one of the best ramp spells. That's a big call. It may not even be accurate. But most of the time when I play Smothering Tithe, nobody pays the 2. So
I completely agree that it's it is that strong. It is also that ubiquitous at this point.
Right.
That like you get it down, you're gonna at least have a person not pay it.
Well, I get almost giddy when people are willing to pay that. It's like, oh, so you're going to pay the 2 every time you go to draw a card? Because that means essentially that you have 2 less lands than you currently have on the board. So
yeah, you're either ramping yourself or de-ramping somebody
right.
else.
So if I only have 5 lands and you've got 8, and you're willing to pay the Smothering Tithe, that means you only have 6 lands to my 5. And that's assuming all your other opponents are also paying it. Because if they're not, I'm getting treasure. I mean, realistically, in a 4-player game, I expect to make 2 treasures every round. And then once the game gets into the mid-game, people have to deal with Smothering Tithe. Because eventually the blue player or the green player or somebody plays a wheel effect.
Ooh.
And then your opponents are drawing 21 cards. Well, how much mana are they going to spend to stop you from getting all that treasure? It's likely they only have 4, maybe 6 mana to spare. Well, they're drawing a mitt full of cards. They're going to want to be able to, they're going to want to get rid of the tithe. But at that point, you've already got, however many treasures you end up getting from this. Smothering Tithe is an amazing ramp spell, and it also does so much work beyond that, meaning it stops people from playing spells because they look at it and they're like, I'm not playing into that. Who plays a Consecrated Sphinx when Smothering Tithe is out? Nobody, because they're not willing to give you the white player, right? But that white player is playing blue, so but people don't do that because they're giving you so much free mana, so much. So it's even hard for players to play Rhystic Study.
Yeah.
The guy's like, oh, are you going to pay 1 for that? And if they don't, he draws the card. And then you turn around to the Rhystic Studies player and you say, are you going to pay 2 for that? I mean, it is tough. I think it warps the game significantly, and it forces people to actually deal with the Smothering Tithe. I'm all for that, at least for now. At some point, I am going to get sick of this card. But I think that this is the way we're going to start to see white get more mana. It's going to come through treasure.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a one-time setup. You don't get the land, which you can tap over and over and over again, but you get the treasure, and you can get them in abundance. So it would give white a way to have a turn or two where they essentially can jump way out in front and then are behind again to keep struggling along. And when you add Smothering Tithe and land tax, well, now I definitely don't need to be playing that land, so I can keep drawing the land with the land tax and rely on Smothering Tithe to keep me up with overall mana. So.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think red and white, we're starting to see it definitely more in red with a lot of the dragons, but a treasure-based ramp rather than like a land-based ramp. So with white being kind of middle of the road, let's say, with ramp, like they've got some very specific, really good ramp cards, but overall kind of lacking. Let's address the elephant in the room, but not the generous gift elephant. Card draw. So obviously, white notoriously does not have that as a part of its color pie.
One only has to look at some of the card draw options that are available for white to realize the options just aren't great. White's card draw tends to be along the lines of cantrip. Essentially, you play a card, you get to draw a card to replace the card you played. And that's well and good, but at some point, you start playing lands and other cards, and you're not those cards aren't replacing themselves. You need to be able to draw a little deeper into your deck.
Yeah, and we're seeing Wizards address this over the past couple of years, especially with like Dawn of Hope type things, where you have to meet certain criteria to get to be able to draw the card. Dawn of Hope says whenever you gain life, pay 2 to draw a card. Okay, Mentor of the Meek. Whenever you play a creature with a power less than 2, you pay 1 to draw a card.
Yeah.
It's very conditional. but it is repeated card draw, which is nice.
Right.
Then you have things like SRAM, which, again, conditional. And then you have a bit of staples of, like, Wall of Omens, for instance. It's 1 and a white, you get a 0/4, and when it enters, you get to draw a card, which is kind of unconditional, but it is also just, like, a permanent version of any of those cantrips.
Right.
So, like, you have to bounce it if you want to get it again. It's just... White's not known for their card draw, unless you build around it, which can be difficult.
Well, I mean, if you want card draw in white, you can build an Enchantress deck. You'll get plenty of card draw, but it is very specific like that. I mean, you mentioned SRAM, same idea. You build around SRAM, and he will draw you a lot of cards. But if it was just a throw in on a deck that had white cards, you'll get some draw, but not nearly enough to make the card worth it. I mean, SRAM will end up drawing you, 2, 3 cards, nothing special. But almost all the cards that you mentioned, Andy, are cards that were made in the last few years. So
right.
We are seeing Wizards address this issue. And the key, and I applaud them for this, is that they're not going crazy with any one card. Like, as much as I like Smothering Tithe, I don't want Wizards to make a white card that draws a crap ton of cards.
Right.
Because then suddenly it's like, okay, well, I have to put Smothering Tithe, and I have to put this card-drawing behemoth into my deck. Great. So now white is now forced to play these 2 cards to get the basics that you want your deck to have. So I don't want to see that. I want to see this incremental growth. I want to see a series of cards that, I'm not looking for white's card draw to be as good or better than blue.
Right.
I don't want that. I just want it to be there. I want to know that I can actually draw at least a few extra cards. And I like the idea that a lot of the cards that they're choosing are conditional. A lot of the cards they're choosing are susceptible to removal. Again, I don't want something huge and outrageous. I just want something that has, that's reasonably good, that will draw me a few extra cards. And if my opponents don't deal with it, it will continue to draw me more and more cards.
I think Dawn of Hope and Mentor of the Meek are definitely, like, spot on of where you want to be for card draw in white. Because both of them are going to be generally creature-based. Dawn of Hope is life gain conditional, but most of the life gain you get is going to be from lifelink, which white is very good at. And I think, obviously Mentor of the Meek is creature-based. You get a creature out, you pay 1, and you get a card. And I think, if you were, you'd have to really try to break that mechanic. But I think, as is, that should be the direction of white card draw. It's just, it's interesting because even though it is fairly conditional, I think having it creature-based is very interesting because white does creatures.
It's where it's at right now. I believe that give it 3 more years. In 3 more years, you're going to have another 6 or 8 creatures, or some kind of permanents that are white that are going to that are going to draw you cards, not just one card, but multiple cards. And I think that as this goes on, you're only going to see white get better and better. Again, I like the way they're going about it.
Definitely.
I feel like when they made efforts to give green card draw, they went over the top. They just so many cards, and so many of them were so good. And
you have a 5/5/6/6, a 6/6 for 5 with Vigilance and Trample that will draw you cards.
Right.
Why? Why do you need that?
Right. Of course. So yeah, I'm happy with where it's going.
Yeah, and I think it is very much in the niche of where white wants to go anyway, which is a lot. Like, you want to go wide generally with white. If you're going the creature route, it's going to be short, but it's going to be wide.
Right, and a card like Mentor of the Meek is going to encourage that.
Exactly. And even Dawn of Hope, like, if you go wide and all of those creatures have lifelink, you're going to be triggering it multiple times. And I think that's kind of the next segment is creatures. It's not the best with creatures. I mean, green has that covered. White, sure, has flyers, but everything's so small and so wide.
What I like about white for creatures is the fact that we're playing commander.
Right.
So, yes, when you think about white creatures, you think about small creatures on the ground who have a bunch of abilities and, overwhelming numbers. But we're talking about close to 30 years of Magic here. There are plenty of big flying white creatures or just bigger creatures. Now, no, there's not as many as there might, there aren't as many big white flying creatures as there are, say, dragons in red or whatever. But they're out there, and because we're playing Commander, you can pick any card. So, especially with creatures, white doesn't have to be the best at having all these big flyers. I mean,
right.
White can be second best or third best even. There's still plenty of them out there. They still do a lot of good stuff. White doesn't have to be the best with ground pounders who do stuff. But again, it's been around so long that you get those benefits. Stuff like, sure, green has, 5 cards that are like Sun Titan equivalent. But white has Sun Titan.
Right.
So it's not like the cards aren't there. There's maybe just fewer of them to choose from in particular areas. So if you are looking for that big flyer or you're looking for whatever, there's just not as many options, but there's still plenty. It's not like there aren't any.
And they have so many enablers for going wide.
Right.
I mean, it's so easy to get a 1/1 in white, but it's just as easy to get 2 1/1s, or even your favorite, Divine Visitation.
Yeah,
that card's white. It makes your go wide strategy that much better. Audric is white. Audric Lunarch Marshal just kind of gives keyword soup to everyone who wants it.
If you have if you have 2 or maybe 3 permanents that give your creatures +1/+1, well, now your 1/1s are 4/4s. And that's assuming they're even 1/1s. They're probably 2/2s. Maybe they're 2/3s. And then they're suddenly 5/6s. And, and when they die, that you can replace them much faster than your opponents can replace them with 6/6s because you're only paying 2 or 3 mana. They have to get rid of the cards that are pumping your creatures and then go after your creatures. The way white does it is just a little bit different, that's all.
You know what else kind of tangentially related to creatures? It's life gain. Life gain is something that white does astronomically well, especially compared to other colors. Most life gain that you see on any other color is generally going to be associated also with white, whether it's, like a red Boros card or an Orzhov card. It's either flavor-wise going to be connected back to white, or it's going to also have white on it.
Right. I want to piggyback onto this particular section. I don't want it to be just life gain. Life gain and vigilance. These are two abilities that show up on white creatures far more often than any other creature. And both of these abilities are significantly undervalued. Significantly. Having a spell that gains you 20 life is great. That's fine. The problem is when you gain 20 life, everybody on the table sees it. They watch your life total go spinning up watch the dial spin up, and suddenly you're a target.
Yeah.
Now, gaining 20 life shouldn't be in and of itself a reason to become a target. It's life. By the end of the game, boom, 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 you can lose that much life in a turn.
Yeah.
And, or you can gain 20 life, get to 40 and still be dead the next turn in a commander game later on. But the key to me is the life gain that is incremental. I love the idea that, look, I played a creature, I gain a life. I swung with my 2/2 and you didn't block, I gained 2 life. I swung with my 2/2, you did block, I gained 2 life. I sat back, you swung at me, you killed my creature, I gained 2 life. Just a little tiny twist. It's like, oh, what was your life total? I was at 18, now I'm at 20. Nobody cares.
No.
But you've gained just that little bit. And the thing is that for white, you're doing that all game long. All game. You're going to end up gaining 30 life over the course of a game. Your opponents are going to have to do 50 to kill you. But nobody thinks about it because you didn't gain 20 all at once. Because that's how white tends to do a lot of their life gain.
It's honestly one of my favorite parts about my Teysa deck is that, like, a round will happen, like 3 or 4 turns, and we'll go by and I'll gain, a life here and somebody will lose a life, and then I'll gain another life and somebody will lose a life, and it just adds up, and it's so incremental that, like, it's hardly noticeable until you physically look at it. Like just shove your face in it and be like, oh my god, Andy's at 50 and everybody else is at 30. And sometimes it happens very fast. And I think, too, funnily enough, with Teysa, she gives your tokens vigilance. And I think that is very key because you're starting to worry less about keeping back blockers. You're moving the game forward, hopefully. It's honestly my 2 favorite mechanics. Whenever somebody posts like a Twitter poll that's like, oh, what's your favorite mechanic? I always say vigilance because I don't have to think as much. I can spend more time talking. I can hang out and
vigilance means you go to your combat step. The only thing you need to worry about when you're going to your combat step and you have vigilance is, are they going to kill my creature because I'm attacking? That's it. It's not a question. If they can't kill your creature, then you swing, because there's no reason not to. It's not like that creature's going to be tapped and unable to block. And in a format where there are 3 opponents who can all hit you on their turns, vigilance is huge. If you have a 3/3 with vigilance, it can swing and hit for 3 against one opponent, and it's still there to block when any 2/2 is coming back at you. In other words, not only have you hit for 3, but you've stopped 6 just by having vigilance. Vigilance is huge, and if you ever doubt it, look at your board the next time you're playing any kind of weenie deck, and I don't care what color you're thinking about, and say to yourself, what would change if all of my creatures were vigilant right now? And I guarantee you're swinging in. I love vigilance. We could do a whole show on vigilance,
and we will. I think these 2 are some of my favorite mechanics because they're getting more and more support, because it is seen as, like, it has that space to grow. We're getting more and more effects like a Johnny's Pridemate, where it's like, when you gain life, do this thing. So it's like lifelink is A+. Johnny's Pridemate, you get a +1/+1 counter every time you gain life. Gideon's something gets 2 +1/+1 counters every time you gain life. You get effects like that. And then vigilance, you've got a number of cards that do a certain thing. Like, you can tap it to do a certain thing. But if you throw Vigilance on there, you can attack and then second main phase tap it to do the thing. So like Speaker of the Heavens has both Vigilance and Lifelink. It's 1/1, sure, but it also only costs 1. But when you tap it, you create a 4/4 White Angel creature token with flying. You can only activate it at sorcery speed, and if you have 7 life more than your starting life total. But like if you're starting out early in your game, you can get there fairly quickly. If you're built around the idea of life gain, but also just circumstantial life gain, is very easy to come by. And I think White does amazing things with its mechanics and keywords. We're about halfway through our discussion. We're going to jump out to an ad break, and we'll be right back. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Cool. Be right back.
This episode of Temple of the False Pod is brought to you by Keldoran Outpost for all your military and soldiering needs. Keldoran Outpost, found just this side of the wall.
Now back to you. Wow. Okay.
Wow.
Cool. That sure was...
It's exciting. Exciting.
And enlightening.
Yes.
So, to kind of continue the discussion of what White does great.
Yes.
You know what White does best? Better than any other color?
Yes.
Good. It's removal.
I'm glad we have the same answer.
People would hard disagree on this one.
They're wrong.
They're wrong, exactly. Black has so many single target removal, unconditional removal.
And that's great. And good for Black. Congratulations, Black. You get to take a creature and put it into a graveyard where practically anybody can get it back. Good stuff, Black. Go team. Team.
Unless it's indestructible, Bruce.
Then it never goes to the graveyard. Oh, what are those creatures? Yeah, they're white.
You know what exiles things real well?
Yeah, white spells.
White spells. My favorite mass removal card, Settle the Wreckage. Sure, Settle the Wreckage is extremely conditional in if somebody's attacking, but it exiles a lot. It exiles their whole attacking board. If they're coming for you, play it. They get something back, but it's generally not going to be as good in EDH because so many people run too few basics. Period. So, like, Settle the Wreckage, for those who don't know, it's 2 and 2 white for an instant. It says exile
all attacking creatures target player controls. That player may search his or her library for that many basic land cards and put those cards onto the battlefield tapped. Then shuffle his or her library.
I think it's real good because there is the chance that they have enough basics to get out, but you are also completely wiping their board, including any hexproof or indestructible creatures.
Andy, this card is even better than you think.
Oh, I bet.
When an opponent is attacking you, you can play Settle the Wreckage. 1, it's instant speed. It only costs 4. So it's a combat trick that people are not really expecting because a lot of White's mass removal is sorcery speed. White players have tended to have to play it on their own turn. This way, you're targeting that opponent that swings at you. You can offer warnings before the start and then follow it up with Settle the Wreckage. That's well and good. You can also do it when an opponent is targeting a different opponent, so you can help your buddy out. That's a pretty niche scenario, but it's there. More importantly, and the way a lot of people don't think about this is, you're white, you're playing weenies. You swing in with 3 1/1 soldier tokens on somebody. Now, whether they block or not is really kind of irrelevant. Let's say they don't. They're 3 1/1 soldiers. They take the 3 points of damage. There is a point after they've been dealt damage where those creatures are still attacking creatures. Now you play Settle the Wreckage. Destroy your own 3/3, your own 1/1 token creatures. You're getting rid of 3 of them. Boo-hoo. And you get 3 basics that come onto the battlefield tapped. That's worth something. That is worth something. Now, sure, doesn't happen right away. It really flies in the face of anything you're trying to do as far as the land tax option that we were talking about. But, well, I mean, if you're swinging in with enough creatures and you're willing to give them up, that's an option.
And even when you are playing it on somebody else's turn, or on somebody else's creatures, you are doing exactly the specific thing that you need to do to not get hurt. You're not wiping the whole board, which politically is great. You are dealing with the threat either to you or to somebody else. And if everything goes well, they're not getting full value out of it.
Right.
And even beyond Settle the Wreckage, we've got a suite of mass removal spells that are notoriously white. They originated in white and will be white until I don't know. I mean, the OG Wrath of God,
right,
is a white card.
And this is an area that Wizards has decided is a white ability, getting mass removal. Invariably, most of the mass removal includes taking out your own creatures. So I would argue loosely Cyclonic Rift is probably the best mass removal card, but I think that virtually every card underneath that is white. As far as number 2, 2 through 10, I think you're looking at mostly white. I mean, you mentioned Settle the Wreckage. I want to give a shout out to Hallowed Burial. For 5 mana, it's a sorcery, so it's a little slower. And it essentially does what it's mass removal. It doesn't sound that exciting until you realize it's put all creatures on the bottom of their owners' libraries. So I don't care if your creatures are indestructible. I don't care if you can regenerate. I don't care if I don't care what your creatures are doing. They're going to the bottom of the library. That's right, the bottom of the library. I'm not letting you put them in your graveyard so you can get them back. I'm not tossing them into exile because that's just boring. I'm putting them at the bottom of your library. There you go. You got a chance to get them back. Just, draw your entire library to get it back. Figure out a way to shuffle up and maybe you got a chance again. I love this. And it is, it's just a great way to, it's a great option when it comes to mass removal at avoiding a lot of the restrictions that come along with most mass removal cards.
Yeah. And I think mass removal is great for white. Exiling, even targeted exile, is still a very white ability. You've got one of the best single target, or you've got the best single target removal, and maybe the second best as well, spell in Swords to Plowshare, and then Path to Exile.
So many people see black as the removal king, and black has a lot of removal cards, a lot of them. But I will take Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile every single time. 1 mana, exile a creature. Not send it to the graveyard. Exile it. We're getting rid of this thing. This is an I have seen it enough card. You can use it on their commander, make them recast it. You can use it on any other creature. You're exiling. This isn't a sack. You're not sending it to the graveyard. So you get around so many of the effects that stop people from destroying. You get around that graveyard recursion that black just doesn't get around.
I think
I think white,
yeah.
white for even targeted removal. There might not be as much of it, but what there is
Yeah.
is way better.
I think even those two, Generous Gift, has been seeing a lot of play lately. And I think that somebody's counter argument would be, oh, well, they're getting, a token, or they're getting life out of it. They're getting something to kind of be a consolation prize for losing their thing. But is that so bad? I mean, I think, like, it generally will feel a little better for the player, which, like, sounds a little gushy and like, oh, like, participation trophy. But, like, it's also, like, if you're playing a multiplayer game, they might think of it not as seriously if they are getting something out of it.
Right.
It's a very EDH way to play. And it's extremely efficient. You get X life, where X is the power. At most it can be like 20 something, but generally it's going to be less than 10. It's very easy to bring that back down. Path to Exile, they get a land out of it. A basic land, I think.
Yeah.
Which, like, great. You know what? Have it. Or even Generous Gift. They get a 3/3 elephant. That's hardly a threat. It's just like a little... It makes both sides feel a little better about, hey, I'm going to ruin your play. It's nice. It's how I like to play. It's why white is one of my favorite colors.
Right, and it's also why white is basically the best removal color.
Right.
Now, when we say removal, up until now, we've just been talking about creature, whether it's mass creature removal or targeted. But white handles virtually every permanent on the board.
Yeah.
I know that Wizards is trying to get white to move away from enchantment removal, but we're playing Commander, folks.
Yeah.
And there is so much good so much good enchantment removal in white. White can handle enchantments and artifacts for days. For days. It just...
Right.
You can't...
I mean, for those who don't know, before green had Naturalize, white had Disenchant. They are shifting it to a green thing, but Disenchant's a common. You've got enchantment removal. You've got artifact removal. You've got what's the one with the sword and it's turning into dust? Return to Dust. Wow. Return to Dust is so good because generally you can play it at instant speed.
Right.
Or if you don't have to take care of something right away, you can play it at sorcery speed and get two things at once. That's real cool. That's extremely valuable.
White can handle virtually anything that hits the board, and it can handle it when it wants to handle it. Meaning, okay, yeah, that's bad for me if you send it my way. I'll wait and see if you send it my way. It means you're not burning your spells immediately to have to deal with these kind of situations because you don't have to deal with it until it's actually going to be a problem for you. And that kind of removal is huge. It to me, it's one of the reasons why it makes white so good, is because white can have an answer to virtually anything on the board, and your opponents just don't know. As long as you've got mana up, you might be able to deal with whatever it is they're about to do to you or throw at you.
Yeah.
So, that's invaluable.
Yeah, and like that's pretty much, that runs the gamut on white. Like, it does a lot. Maybe sometimes not as great as other colors, but like it does everything you need it to do. Which will bring us to some sort of conclusion of, there are two things that people look at when thinking of white. Let's first talk about mono white or white primary commanders. how good would you say it compares to other primary or mono-colored commanders? I mean,
The difficulty white has as a monocolor is, well, I mean, we've already described it. I mean, we're talking about the ramp is there, but it's not super powerful, and the card draw is just not that great right now. When you pair those in one color, that makes it really tough for white to be your primary color. You really end up relying on artifacts and other ways, artifacts, or if white is a primary color, you're relying on your secondary color heavily to fill that gap.
Definitely.
Yes.
And I think too, with that, I think like even with a somewhat focused mono white deck, it kind of comes down to the pilot. I think a decent player could pilot a mono white deck to victory quite easily. Obviously, depending on who the opponents are and who the other commanders are, but may not necessarily steamroll your opponents. But if you play it right, especially if you kind of like hold back at the beginning a little to kind of build up under cover of darkness and kind of strike at the end, I think it's like that's a legitimate way to play. Which is just what white kind of just does.
It's one of my favorite ways to play, and
whether you want to or not.
Well, yes. Too many times I'm, well, I mean, what? 3 times out of every 4, you're probably not leading the game from the outset. So if you're not comfortable playing that way, then there's an issue. And white is really good at playing that style. So 3 out of every 4 games, white is going to be really good for you. Well, wait a minute. Why is white bad again? I mean, I understand that, obviously there are restrictions to the color, but you just need to play smart and be aware, and as you will, after this episode, you're aware of white's limitations and white's strengths, and you will play to those strengths. So if you want the card draw that desperately, then look at Enchantress, look at SRAM, look at various types of builds. But in the end, I mean, green has ramp and card draw. Blue has tons of card draw, and maybe not as much ramp, but so much card draw that it actually sort of qualifies as ramp. So those 2 colors are well out in front. Black has card draw, and their ramp is not as good. It's a lot more. It's a little slower, but it's still there. And I would argue that it's black's ramp is at least as good as white's. So as a monocolor, I would say white is probably your 4th best option. But even there, I'm not going to rush out and try and build mono white.
I think it too depends on what you are trying to do with your game.
Right.
In a general stance, I would absolutely agree that mono white, probably 4th best. But for me, I kind of want to do that. And I think where white shines, for a lack of a better term, white shines as a secondary color, as your backup, or not even backup, but your support for your primary color.
Yeah.
My Tesa deck is primarily black. But that white really comes through in the life gain, the vigilance, the removal. I would say white, if you are having trouble, if you want to play like a two color deck, you're having trouble picking the second color, personally, I'd say choose white. You've got a vast library of white spells to choose from, that will ultimately help you do your thing. if not necessarily win, but do your thing.
Right. You described white as a good secondary color, or, a good, I would argue that it's a good color to even do a 50-50 pairing with.
Yeah.
I would run white as a primary color with a strong secondary color running with it.
Yeah.
When I look at, the guilds, I mean, Orzhov is my favorite guild. It's not close.
Yes.
I enjoy playing Azorius, less so than Orzhov, but I enjoy it. Selesnya is probably in my top 3 as well.
I love Selesnya.
And
especially for that Vigilance.
Right. And the fourth one is Boros. Now, I have 2 Boros decks built, and they continue to exist primarily because of white. Because the white cards that are in there continue to prop things up and keep me alive for long enough for for some red direct damage to finish off some games. But I enjoy playing Boros. I enjoy that style of, going all out and send, tap it, send it in, send in the troops, go, go, go. I like that style. Quite often when you're playing Boros, you get put at the bottom of the list of people who need to be dealt with because, hey, you're playing Boros. Everybody thinks that they can handle you, and as long as you're not overplaying your hand, you can come through out of nowhere and just blast through the last opponent or the last 2 opponents quickly and pull out wins. It can happen. It does happen, and it's part of the reason why I really enjoy seeing white as part of the as part of a color group. And I know right now I'm looking at my next deck build. I plan to build a 3-color build. I haven't decided which one yet, but I can tell you right now, white will be one of those 3 colors because it gives me all of the options for responses. I'm not looking for counterspell. Counterspell is any kind of counter means that I have to decide as soon as you play it whether it's a threat to me. I don't want that. I want it to be a threat to me, and then I'm dealing with it. And white does that better than anybody else, so that's why I want white in the deck.
Yeah. There's just something that feels better about removal over countering, but that is also, I guess, a conversation for another time. Yeah, and I think with white, there is some legitimacy to the meminess of hating on white, but I think overall it's a little blown out of proportion. I think that when directly compared to other colors, meaning when seen in cycles, white sometimes gets the shaft, but in other in non-cycle cards, it does some pretty cool things.
White may not be the leader, but honestly, white is not nearly as far behind as you think it is. I really believe that. We are very close, very close. I think we're a handful of cards from Wizards away from seeing white move up into the upper tier where players are really going to have a hard time trying to deal with decks where white is primary. I think that's where we're headed. So
I honestly think that even before Commander Legends came out, we with Keeper of the Accord, I think even before that we were starting to see a lot more white staples appearing, or even just EDH staples appearing in white in standard sets. Heliod's Intervention is an amazing card.
Right.
Settle the Wreckage came out in Ixalan. That was 3 years ago. Jesus. Never mind. That's a long time. You've got a number of white cards that are coming out with more frequency that are starting to be seen more kind of as staples. So
right.
Yeah. I'm excited to see the future of white. I hope they don't go overboard as they did with green or blue in the past couple sets, but that die has been cast literally Mostly because they're on a 2-year production cycle. But yeah, and that I just want to go build white now.
There we go.
Yeah, so
we'll run some Orzhov and some Selesnya builds, and
I'll just keep running my Taser deck.
There you go.
But that'll do it for this week on Temple of the False Pod. Be sure to tune in next week and the following 8 weeks, as we have a whole season of 10. You've got some spicy things coming up in the mix. And if you haven't checked out last season, they're all out there. Go check it out.
What are you waiting for?
Give us a like or whatever. Rate us. You'll hear it all in my spiel in a second. But thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Thank you for hanging out. We are Temple of False Pod, where our decks aren't optimized. Clearly, we're running white. But our play sure is
heck our fun. Hee hee.
Clearly, because we're playing white. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Have a great night, and may your 5th land be the temple.
Bye.
Hey everyone, Andy here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Temple of the False Pod. Just a few housekeeping things here at the end of the show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, pretty much wherever you can find podcasts. Subscribe and give us a review. It really helps out the show. And it'll show us what you like about our podcast. Also, we've got a Twitter and an Instagram. Our handle is FalsePodMTG, all one word. So be sure to follow us. Feel free to reach out to us there or drop us an email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com and tell us your favorite magic-related story. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again to you and to Bruce. He's Mana Burned on Twitter, and I'm Andy Weekend on Twitter and Twitch. We're Temple of the False Pod, where our decks aren't optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Have a great night, and may your 5th land be the temple.